God bless all of you. Welcome everyone within the walls of the Catholic University of Lublin, and also those who are with us today online. I'm very happy that we're able to meet at this very prominent ecclesiastical and scientific event. At the beginning, I'd like to thank the organizing committee head, Father Professor Przemysław Kantyka, the Dean of Theology Department, who inaugurated this event and has been working on it for many weeks. I'm happy to have prominent guests here with us, the head of the National Institute of Remembrance, director of the Public Television office in Lublin. And other prominent guests I'll list in a moment, the hosts of today's proceedings, but I'd like to welcome all of you and say how happy I am that you're here with us. I'm happy to see the youth here who study theology, not just as part of A course, but also B course, which are the alumni who've come here to join us today. And round of applause to them as well. So Federation of Catholic Universities in Europe has been founded. There are 45 of them, and in the last meeting in France of this association, one of the rectors of Catholic universities from the Balkans took the floor, and this speech resounded, not just during the meeting, but afterwards as well, because for the first time ever, a representative of Eastern Central Europe applied to the West to listen to the East of Europe. For cultural and historical reasons, he said that not just the members of the EU need sensitivity to the so-called EU values, but the old EU is supposed to pay homage to history and pay respects to historical facts that led us to where we are right now. So we're here today and we are entitled to our fruitful sensitivity. Does it mean that we want to change the world forcefully and our neighbors forcefully? We can say, on the contrary, the world is changing on its own accord, and you might even say it's happening too fast. Do we want to put the world to a halt? We may say quite the contrary. Blessed is this moment here today and the next week, where we stop to enjoy each other's company, the company of our brothers and sisters who we love, maybe not love them hard enough. The initiative of the network of trimarium universities that we entered 6 months ago, as we know, it congregates Catholic universities from the Baltic, the Adriatic to the Black Sea. It spans 12 countries. There are more applicants now, those who want to join. It's of utmost importance, especially now, given the changing dynamics of the European security policy. It is a fruitful initiative for research and development. It's a kind of a framework, or a scaffolding, if you will. So we're using this scaffolding to build on top of it, to build from Tallinn to Burgas, from Zagreb to Kharkiv, and we can call it a golden cross, striving for the future, which is the future of free nation states. The International Theological Congress brings back memory of religious heritage, and the heritage of communities. It's the writings of martyrdom in the colonial past that we know as Soviet gulags. We hope to understand God's thought, God's idea for the future, and we want to fulfill God's thought. The idea of trimarium crosses political boundaries. We know that political ideas come and go, and they divide more often than unite, but the world of spiritual values is fixed, it is stable, it is uniting. The power of spirit that comes from Christian Religion is something that carries and brings fundamental values our societies were founded upon: faith and freedom, peace and unity, family strong with God, Christ's church as a sign of all of the values, pluralistic values for a pluralistic state. This is what brings us together now. This is why we meet and congregate within these walls. We want to know each other better, and in Christ we want to love each other, we can say. It's also a Congress of the youth. It's worth noting. It's not a Congress about the problems of the youth or Congress for the youth. It is a Congress about the faith of the young, what they can give each other, what the young generations can exchange. We haven't had such a big theological event for years in Poland. As you may well remember, 2010 in Poznań was the last event of this series. It was a Congress of Polish Theologians under the motto, "Between the sense and the nonsense of human existence." 13 years it's been, and it's been a long time, long as past itself, and it was as unpredictable as the future. So today we say, faith and theology closer to us. The Lord is close. Comes to me, not just to me, comes to us. Notice your sister, notice your brother. We've been living close to each other, but oftentimes we know so little about each other. Although we share our lives and we share many traumas, now we're on the track to change it as worshippers, believers, theologians, the carriers of God's word. Let's allow the history of the salvation of our nation states refresh all of us through the whiff of the Holy Spirit. So with love, we want to talk about each other, to each other, and never again speak against each other. It's important that we share more than could ever divide us in the past. The gospel is what brings us all together and what unites us. I want God's blessing, the refreshing spirit that comes from above, to make our discussions fruitful. And I want to take this refreshing whiff of the Holy Spirit and bring it with you to your universities, your countries, together with the goodness that comes from Jesus. And the patron of Catholic universities is always the Holy Heart of Jesus. Let this heart of Jesus guide us, because if it guides us, we know we're on the right path. So fruitful proceedings, happy stay in Lublin. God bless you all. Thank you for your attention. Let's thank His Magnificence, Father Rector, the main patron of this event. Dear all, the International Theological Congress that we're inaugurating now is an academic initiative, and its goal is to tighten the bonds between scientific communities, the academia, and the ecclesiastical groups in terms of theology, the academic integration of member states, or the states being part of the Intermarium initiative, or Tri-City initiative, that is a platform for cooperation of 12 countries between the Baltic, Adriatic and the Black Sea, has found a reflection, as Father Rector has already mentioned, in a network of universities, the Three Seas University Network in Lublin. The goal of the network is to foster integration of the academia in the mentioned countries by cooperating within the area of commercialization of knowledge and exchange of experiences, didactic and scientific ones. There is a need to cooperate in the realm of theological sciences. The Congress of Theologians of the Trimarium is on parallel with the Forum of the Youth, and both events are under the motto, faith and theology closer to us. And this motto shows the goals of the two. Integration of scientific reflection with pop science, religion and culture. It's a place where theologians from countries of similar history, culture, spiritual heritage to meet and to together think about issues that are particularly challenging for today's theological reflection in this part of Europe. The Congress is also emphasizing that academic theology is playing its role. It is much needed. It doesn't limit itself, though, to academic endeavors and scientific enterprises, because it is about serving the church as a whole. It's about serving the community, the society, and serving particular individuals in experiencing their faith and practicing their faith. International Tri-City Congress, the Theology in the Dialogue with Modernity, carries new problems, new issues that need understanding and addressing on part of the theologians. We are not ignoring the burning issues, such as the relationship of the church to totalitarianisms, war, politics, also new anthropological challenges, namely the attempts to redefine family. Apart from that, we will focus on the experience of God in the modern world. We'll be talking about the image of God, what kind of God we believe in. Is it Abrahamic God of Isaac and Jacob, or is it Jesus Christ's God? Or is it maybe a different construct of our minds, a misconstrued notion of God that we then have to combat? We'll reach to the self-reflection of church communities and their role in modern societies. In the Forum of the Tri-City Theologians at the end of the Congress, we'll put emphasis on analyzing the priorities to do with the development of theological sciences in the context of the Trimarium University Network. The representatives of research units representing particular states will emphasize the importance of theological studies in the context of the specificity of every state that is part of the Trimarium initiative. And the highlights of the proceedings will be the signing of a declaration of cooperation by representatives of universities from the 12 countries here. We hope that the Congress is a great opportunity to exchange experiences that will lead to the creation of new initiatives of cultural, religious, scientific nature between Trimarium states. Also, a few words about the next part of the Congress that we called the Forum of the Youth, because it is the youth that's been putting it together with us, for them, for the youth. It is afternoons after 4 p.m., pop scientific panel discussions aimed at the youth. And this part is called the Faith for Me and for You, to show that faith is still attractive and is still molding our lives. And in the evening we'll have a church service and cultural part called Science, Faith, an Important Matter. So we'll welcome you to participate in these parts of the Congress. I'd like to welcome here in the Catholic University of Lublin all of the distinguished guests, our speakers, our panelists, the moderators of the panels, and all the ones who will share this time of scientific reflection with us. I also would like to welcome those who are here online. It is going to be available all through 5 days of the Congress. I'd like to thank Father Rector, His Magnificence, Professor Mirosław Kalinowski, PhD, and also the Cool Development Foundation, Ministry of Science and Culture, and all of the cooperators and our colleagues who worked hard, contributed financially to this event, making all of it possible.
All our distinguished guests from all the countries they came from, your presence here is very much cherished by us. The exchange of ideas which we plan and we will effect you here in this building of the Catholic University of Lublin, which holds the name of Saint John Paul II, will be a new, unique opportunity to tie our links much closer. I would like to welcome also warmly all our English-speaking students from all the countries they come from. Na dzisiejsze przedpołudnie
Before noon, we have planned two discussion panels. First one is entitled Karol Wojtyła and Stefan Wyszyński, Accusations, Facts, the Activities of Communist Security Services, and Ryszard Montusiewicz, the head of the third program of the Polish Public Television Lublin office, will be the moderator of the panel, and I would like to ask him to take the floor and also invite the panelists to take the floor.
Dziękuję serdecznie.
Thank you very much. I would like to proceed with inviting the panelists in the first session during this International Congress, Theological Congress. First of all, I would like to invite President of the National Institute of National Remembrance, Dr. Karol Nawrocki, Father Jadochnalik, PhD, representing Stefan Wyszyński University in Warsaw. Our next speaker will be Dr. Paweł Skibiński of the University of Warsaw. And the final panelist, Reverend Dominik Zamiatała, PhD, professor representing Stefan Wyszyński University of Warsaw. The organizers, the panel will last until 11 a.m. Probably we shall start with a short presentation, introduction of the talks. We will start with the president of the Institute of National Remembrance, Dr. Karol Nawrocki. Dear magnificent deans, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, I want to share some reflections on Pope John Paul II as the priest, bishop, metropolitan, and pope, especially at the time of so-called red totalitarianism. Ladies and gentlemen, Karol Wojtyła, as a priest, bishop, guide, and pope of the church from the far land, was guarding Christian values, which also represent the Polish values, representing European identity. He was opposing the Soviet values together with materialist vision of world. And I want to point out that already in the 19th century, this was the case, and I'm aware that it could be controversial in this particular university. The system, the communist system, in that system, Vladimir Lenin was supposed to replace God and the Christian value. And Saint John Paul II was to work and operate in such a world. The Catholic thought in which church should be present in all aspects of life it was a really great art that John Paul II tried to achieve. He tried to be lenient, but at the same time, he powerfully tried to respect the values of the church. In this dialogue with the modernity, Karol Wojtyła used natural arguments pointing to the revelation and to the actual aim of the church, which is, of course, the salvation. He entered into the path of dialogue in official contacts with the authorities. The scale of his influence, of course, increased along with the functions that he played in the church and in the world. In his autobiography of 1967, he wrote about his vocation. My priesthood, my ministry is inscribed in the experiences of Rome. He actually had the opportunity to see how the priesthood is connected to the ministry of both the clergy and the lay people. This experience had an expression in his lay ministry for the families. He always emphasized that the lay people helped him a lot on his way, on his path. Also, the people of culture. Karol Wojtyła, as a young vicar and later as bishop, was engaged in the activity of intelligentsia. He was also a representative of the opposition to totalitarianism. His life and his decisions was in opposition to the activity of the state. Generally speaking, priest Wojtyła was thought to be negatively to have the negative attitude to the Polish People's Republic. That was the idea cherished by the communist government in Poland at that time. In 1955, the secret services in Krakow began operative activity called Pedagogue. They were observing Karol Wojtyła and his activity in the student environment. He was followed among the youth at the university. They were particularly looking at his mode of work with students, which was against the atheistic ideas of educating people. Among others, his homily in 1956 was deemed to be against that. As the metropolitan and bishop, he was still engaged in activities, pilgrimages. He was involved in the development of the academic ministry. At the Curia, a commission was appointed in Krakow. The students tried to could experience all the truths, spiritual, etc., that were lacking in the communist reality. The opposition against the communist oppression was supported by the Kraków Metropolitan, that is Wojtyła. In 1977, when after Stanisław Pejas died, based on that death, the Student Committee of Solidarity was born. Kardynał Wojtyła very often emphasized the significance of the ministry. The way the youth would act and how it is educated will have an important impact on the future of the Polish society. Security services in the 70s started operation under the cryptonym Group F. Karol Wojtyła organized religious conferences in Kraków for lawyers, for doctors. It was a vocational ministry. Searching for the dialogue with communists, he also invited the representatives of the party, also looking for the possible themes and topics to discuss with them. Ideologically, secret services in 1965 said that Wojtyła's activity was very detrimental to the intellectual development of the future generations, of the young generations. His tactics in the operation together with security services was particularly followed. The expectations of Archbishop Eugeniusz Baziak, who died in 1964, Metropolitan of Kraków, who chose Wojtyła as the Bishop of Kraków. Archbishop Baziak explained that he wanted to have a really great support in Karol Wojtyła. The agents of secret services wrote that Bishop Baziak underlined that Karol Wojtyła knew very well how secret services work. We know that Karol Wojtyła supported the inhabitants of Nowa Huta in 1960 and provided great help for the church in that area. Wojtyła took part in pilgrimages. What is very important, Karol Wojtyła, it is very important and holy place for the people inhabiting Silesia, Piekary Śląskie. In the archives of the Institute of National Remembrance, there are some fragments of that homily, which is probably quite important for the historians. As the supporting bishop, Karol Wojtyła try to achieve the unity of the clergy and also proper relationships with the curia. He was involved in different meetings. The materials indicate that it was quite exceptional. Wojtyła helped prepare priests to their ministry. When in 1978, 78, when he was chosen Pope as the cardinal from the far land, but through his fidelity to faith, he was actually quite close to Europe. The laicized Western Europe needed animation and stimulation. So actually he could understand their needs. He was active, open to intellectual dialogue. So in order to present my conclusion, I want to add that although for the Institute of National Remembrance, Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II, left a very important legacy, not also intangible heritage, including words for his compatriots. He called for the protection of unborn life. This is the heritage that we also use in our educational activity at our institute, when also looking for the directions of our activity. When he was appealing for a mature freedom, John Paul II was fully aware that the system which he criticized, which he had been criticizing his entire life, is also connected with specific threats. In 1991, during his pilgrimage, he said that the freedom should be mature. Only on such a freedom the nation can build something. We cannot create a fiction of freedom because it actually enslaves man. Also in Germany, during his pilgrimage at Brandenburg Gate, John Paul II gave a speech, a very important speech, relating to the new reality, where he said, man is called to freedom. There is no freedom without love, without truth, without solidarity, but also without victims, sacrifice. Freedom must be wary of internal, external difficulties.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this great speech, because on one hand it brought together some activities and actions of Karol Wojtyła, but at the same time you pointed to historical sources that I think hadn't been known to people here before this speech. So I didn't introduce you in detail. Now I will fill in the gaps, if you will. Dr. Karol Nawrocki, a graduate of history at the Gdańsk University, for 10 years a PhD in humanities. Since 2009, a member of the Institute of National Remembrance, and also at one point the head of the National Remembrance Institute in Gdańsk. He coordinated scientific and didactic activities. Later, he was a director of the Second World War Museum in Gdańsk. It's a very prominent institution that was really a headache to convene, to build it. He's a member of a dozen or so books in the modern history of Poland. Initiator, consultant, author of commemorative, educational, and exhibition projects. Later, he was the vice president of the Institute of National Remembrance, and from 2021, Karol Nawrocki has been the president of the Institute of National Remembrance. So we will hopefully come back to your points, the issues you hinted at in your short speech. Now, I would like to ask Father Dr. Jan Dochnalik from the Stefan Wyszyński University to take the floor. Karol Wojtyła addressing child abuse, canon law perspective. Father Dr. Dochnalik is a presbyter of Kraków Archdiocese. He did PhD at the Roman Papal University in 2010, and 2011-2022 he was the chancellor of the Field Bishop Center. He's a academic worker at the Warsaw University. He also has been a member of the Center for Protection of Children's Rights in Kraków and other institutions working for the protection of the welfare of young and innocent. Doctor, please take the floor. I'd like to thank you for this introduction. This phone is not because I'm addicted to it, but because there's a time watch on it. I'll time myself. I don't want to go over the time allocated to me, having such prominent discussion, panelists and discussions ahead. So it's a topic that was addressed first by reliable articles by Rzeczpospolita, by Krzyżak and Litka editors, and also by movies and other publications that I won't mention here. I used the first sources, the reliable ones. Before I start, I'm limited by time. I want to show you one case, one situation, one perpetrator, and the reaction of Karol Wojtyła to this horrible situation that unfortunately took place. Not because I want to gloss over the others, but because the other ones, with Father Surgent, we don't have enough information. We cannot throw accusations around, and his future criminal activities were outside of the church. Karol Wojtyła said goodbye to him, basically. At that point, however, some journalists quoted Father Saduś as, was discussed. We do not know whether crimes were committed. We don't know whether there were immoral acts committed. We don't know if John Paul II ever knew about any of it. So we should abstain from accusations. Father Lawrence, I'm giving you the names of the priests. The priests are dead now, and I'm giving you the names because they were used by the journalists, so the public names. Father number one being a parish priest in Żywiec region, abused girls during religious education class at school. I'm giving you the chronology here because I want you to see how quick the reaction was. 5-10 years ago, it was unprecedented. So the reporting of child abuse, 28th of February, 2nd of March, the parish priest goes to have a discussion with his supervisor, both of them go, and there is a meeting there with Karol Wojtyła. And we know from accounts, also accounts of the security services agents, we know that Karol Wojtyła, the future pope, couldn't believe it. Then he burst into tears, and tears were not the only reaction of Father Cardinal Wojtyła. Then Karol Wojtyła told them to leave the parish right away, and he sent him to Sisters monastery in Kraków, where the perpetrator had to do his penitence in isolation. Other documents, I don't know if I'll have time to discuss them. He it says that the priest in question was suspended from carrying out, well, priesthood duties. 18th of March was the arrest. At that point, he hadn't been in the parish for weeks. 1981, he was released from prison. He moved into Zakopane on probation. Please, let's look at the social context. The punishments for serious crimes by serious perpetrators of the two priests were 2 to 3 years of prison. And there wasn't any comment that this was, well, too short of a prison sentence. This was usual at that time. And we have access to a letter that we have thanks to Institute of National Remembrance. Perhaps it was stolen and then copied from the post office, but I'm glad we have it. I wanted to show you this because there are 3 historians here, experts. I don't want to get into what is reliable and what isn't. This definitely is. This was written by Karol Wojtyła himself, and it shows, well, it goes to show his way of thinking and his MO. Avoidance of punishment. I have to say that the clergy first said the priest was accused. Charges were administered by the state judiciary. So the clergy said that if the state punished the perpetrator, the clergy did not have to do it. The archdiocese judges said this, but what was a way in which Karol Wojtyła worded it? Not punishing the crime by the clergy does not eradicate crime. Every crime should be punished. If in the case of the priest in question, there was punishment, the state judiciary punished the priest. Now I'm summarizing because we're running out of time. This was the reaction to the act by the Cardinal Karol Wojtyła. Karol Wojtyła said that the priest was not innocent. He had to be punished. And, well, Karol Wojtyła addressed this issue thoroughly. What was the punishment for it? So Latin is a language close to our hearts, and the code of 2017, from the 2017, was written in Latin. So if one commits a crime against a minor, against commandments, various kinds of child abuse under the age of 16, was to be suspended, which is exactly what happened. And the person in question was declared infamous. The infamy was factual or legal. In this case, it was factual. It was declared, and it was declared in that case. Please remember, these were communist times, and everybody did everything they could so as for the question not to be disseminated. This was a social taboo. It used to be. Not so long ago. And then the priest was demoted, was moved to a monastery, but by the act of grace, the deponentum, or the deposition, was not used. And this is a mistake. And also, I made the same mistake years ago, but journalists happily denied it. This deposition wasn't removing a priest from priesthood. This was removing priests from office permanently. So the canon law did not allow to remove a priest from priesthood in its entirety. This is the rule the tribunal acted against. It's in the code today, but because these crimes are considered to be most heinous, this punishment is not used for these crimes. The judge may abstain from punishment if the priest was already punished by the state judiciary. I've got 1 minute 40 seconds more. I want to say this. Karol Wojtyła reacted in a different way too. He declared that he wouldn't dole out punishment. He knew that he had authority. He knew that he had clout and he could put pressure on administrative units. And in the letter, he said that the priest would never come back to educating children. And the priest never did, due to Karol Wojtyła. So he was forbidden from carrying out a confession. And then the priest was there, apart from the prison sentence, 2 years without jurisdiction for confession, and we knew that he didn't stay in the parish, he stayed in the monastery, rewriting liturgical texts, and then after 2 years of good behavior, he was allowed more. The awareness of the need for protection, not just in terms of punishment, but also penitence, and removing the priest from further actions that could be harmful, was emphasized. Perhaps in the discussion to be had, we will get into it. Why the train? Because John Paul II moved the track. If a train going on the wrong track cannot be stopped, it needs to be put on a different track. And then in the indults for the United States and Ireland, and when the issue finally was given in 2001 to the Congregation of Science and Faith, led by Ratzinger, and the cherry on top, it was then given to American cardinals. People have the right to know that in monasteries, in priesthood, there is no place for those who harm children. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you for that presentation based on the sources and the canon, so that we quiet down the media hype and base our discussion on the facts. And I think this is actually connected to the formula of this panel, of the dialogue with the modernity. The facts are important in that dialogue. And now I would like to invite Dr. Paweł Skibiński from the University of Warsaw, who will be talking about the phenomenon of St. John Paul II's pilgrimages to communist Poland. What communist secret services sources tell us, and what they do not tell us about that. Dr. Skibiński is expert of John Paul II's thought in the center dedicated to him. He's also author of, among others, book on the revival of this earth that is dedicated to the discussion of John Paul II's pilgrimage to Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the authorities of John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin for inviting me to this Congress. It's certainly a challenge for me because I'm a historian. I will refrain from using historical technicalities or technicalities of a historian. I work on the material of pilgrimages of John Paul II to Poland. The monograph of describing his pilgrimages is probably one of the very first attempts to clarify the issue. Based on my experiences while working on the first book, but also the second one, which is now in progress, at the Institute of National Remembrance, where the president works, our first panelist, there are 3 great collections on the acts, the so-called object acts, collected by communist secret services, by the communist militia, dedicated to the control of individual pilgrimages by John Paul II to communist Poland. Those were 3 in the 70s and 80s. In 1979, those were Aurora 1 and Aurora 2. cases. For already more than a dozen of years, the acts have been published. I can mention two publications devoted to that. That is the Operation Aurora, devoted to Katowice and to the second pilgrimage of John Paul II. He's present in Katowice at that time, and the publication on Krakow, documenting 3 object cases connected to Krakow. The selection of those documents has been published in at least 2 series by the Institute of National Remembrance on the portal of the institution, but also on the Center for John Paul II Thought. Also at the website dedicated to that, you can see the documents. It's worth pointing out that these are really unprecedented matters. Already the case of 1979, relating to the first pilgrimage of John Paul II in Poland, mobilized a number of Secret Service co-workers. There were about 150 and 200,000 people involved in the case. So this is really unprecedented. If it comes to the following pilgrimages, many people were engaged in observing the pilgrimages. Secret agents, militiamen, different groups of people connected to communist secret services. This mobilization was actually justified from the point of view of communist regime, because they try to control the congregations of millions of people participating in the meetings with the Pope. Sometimes the meetings were attended by a couple of million of people. The authorities had a particular aim in mobilizing such huge groups of people. As the researchers from the Institute of National Remembrance underlined, there were 3 such aims. First, the collection of data. Secondly, the control of the society and the attempt to manipulate the society. And thirdly, repression. Although in the context of those object cases, the repressions are not so visible. However, there is also the 4th aim, that is the attempt to mitigate the certain aftermaths of those pilgrimages. In the acts, we may find different type of information. So, for instance, a report on the preparation for the pilgrimages, information on how the places have been secured by the agents, the opinion polls concerning the social attitude to the pilgrimages, and the evaluation of the results of the pilgrimages. Secret services usually use the word securing the pilgrimage. Especially the young recipients may think that it was supposed to mean that the Pope should be safeguarded during the pilgrimage, but secret services were actually, of course, concerned with the possible harm that could happen to the Pope. But at the same time, they were actually concerned with the potential negative impact of his pilgrimages on the further functioning of the state. Based on those reports, we may actually see what the priorities of the states were one of my students actually devoted a monograph to that. And this referred to the to the state of John Paul II in Lublin in 1987. So one of the possible aims was to neutralize the political opposition. This was one of the main engagements of the security service agents. So this referred to 1987. So the opposition was actually real at that time. This allows us also to learn more about historical events. We are able to filter out certain details, but not all the information is actually true, which is problematic. And finally, we were able to understand the specificity of the pilgrimage as a time of a pause of the proper functioning of the communist regime. So it turned out that the state was actually helpless in the face of this presence of Pope with the nation during his pilgrimages. Very often we talk about the fact whether the sources that are stored at the Institute of National Remembrance are reliable or not. From my point of view, as a researcher, this question is actually posed in the wrong way. The question we should be asked is, what do we use them for? So those sources are not reliable if we deem them the only source of information on the pilgrimage. Why they are not entirely reliable as the only source? Why do we need to confront them with other sources? Well, there are three such reasons. First, the information gathered by secret services are very specific. Very often they rely on rumors. Sometimes they reflect reality, but not always. That's the specificity of this type of information. This must be verified. Secondly, the aims of the secret services, communist secret services, are very specific. They are looking, they want to control the society. And finally, we need to remember that the apparatus of the totalitarian regime tries to give credit to the materials that it creates. For instance, when we think about the materials created by the current services, finally, the sources that I was referring to are not entirely reliable because they sometimes are used to, so to say, whiten the services in case of a possible failure of the regime. And finally, the most fleeting issue, those people, the communist regime, could not understand the religious way of seeing things. it's quite. This is rather a source with which this is rather something with which we could explore the mentality. The sources gathered in the 3 object cases devoted to the Pope's pilgrimages show that the communist regime has as its most important objective the control, the all-encompassing control of the whole society. The scope of the activity, mobilizing such huge resources and so many people, show that these ambitions were actually continued until the very late 80s. These documents also show the helplessness of the communist secret services. It shows that they were losing control and were unable to entirely control the society. They were unable to block the Pope's activity and the social activity, despite the aims and intentions. Thus, to sum up, I want to focus your attention on the fact that it's a very interesting evidence how Pope's faith and the faith of people meeting the Pope transformed the reality despite the dominance of material resources of the communist regime and the state. However, that regime was unable to cope with reality because of the spiritual factor. This can teach us, I hope, humbleness and the power of the religious element. This coexists and co-shapes the reality together with material elements. And sometimes we forget about it, both from the historical and social perspective. Thank you.
Również
Thank you as well. 3 speeches we've just listened to regarded the persona of John Paul II. However, the topic of the panel of this particular meeting also has to do with Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński. And in the security services under communist government had files and materials and data on Stefan Wyszyński. And this is the topic to be addressed by Dominik Zamiatała, PhD holder, who's a Claritin, is a historian of modernity, who's with the historical faculty at the Stefan Wyszyński University in Warsaw and the Papal University in Wrocław. Father Doctor is a writer of numerous books and academic articles related to modern history, the relationship between the state and the church. So please take the floor. Thank you for your invitation, for the opportunity to share my reflections on the primate Stefan Wyszyński, as viewed by the security services documents. In his activities as Lublin bishop, Stefan Wyszyński in 1947 was brought to the attention of the communist government. The first note in security services files comes from the 5th of May 1946, and data was collected on him in his time of activities as a bishop in Lublin region. The security services were invigilating him. A dozen or so agents were looking into his life and activities. But the activities against him were underway for 35 years. Final documents on Cardinal Wyszyński is to do with a mention of his funeral. So it was all the way till the end. So from the beginning of his Lublin operations, a dozen or so agents were reporting on his activities to the communist government. They reported on the contents of his sermons, about his decisions, but also the contents of his meetings with various persons and societies within the region. His public statements in particular were scrutinized. When he became the primate of Poland, this invigilation strengthened. And he was surveilled during his sermons when he was carrying out church service, also meetings with particular persons and various groups. His decisions were also monitored very closely. And what's interesting, looking at the documents from the security services of the communist government, we notice a pattern. We see that agents were supposed to collect all kinds of information from all sources of information, apart from listening in to him in personal, and they were supposed to, on parallel, create comprehensive documents to create a kind of photo kit or a psychological profile of Primate Wyszyński. So looking into these documents, we notice that a curriculum vitae, a CV for Primate Wyszyński, was put together effectively. It had to do with his life, statements, operations, but not just security services that looked into the Catholic Church were interested in Primate Wyszyński. Other departments of the government were interested in him too. The Foreign Affairs Ministry was also looking into his activities. So Primate's statements abroad were also closely scrutinized, especially those he issued in Rome, in Vatican. They wanted to acquire information regarding Primate's contacts with the Pope. They were closely following his relationships with the Roman and Vatican hierarchs, which is also noteworthy. Polish security services were cooperating with Eastern Bloc's country security services, also with the KGB. We have notes from the 60s where they clearly show that KGB, together with Polish security forces, were cooperating to find out and research the contacts between the primates and priests and heads of the church in the Eastern Bloc countries. And we have something to show for it. We have information about the attempts at breaking into the closed circle of acquaintances of Primate Wyszyński. So at the beginning of the 60s, we know about training courses for the security services workers and KGB workers in Kiev and Moscow, where information was exchanged. Information regarding the Catholic Church in Poland and their activities, and mainly Primate Wyszyński. Importantly, from the very beginning, security services were monitoring all of his national and foreign correspondence. And Primate Wyszyński knew exactly that this was happening. And following in the footsteps of his predecessor, he didn't send the most important correspondence by other channels through France, through Italy, so that these letters wouldn't get into the hands of the security services, but some information, some correspondence went through regular mail. And according to canon law, the moment he turned 75, he used diplomatic post to send his resignation to the Holy See. So before Holy See received this document, Polish security services, Edward Gierek, the General Secretary of the Communist Party in Poland, knew that before the Holy See did. They did everything they could so that the Pope wouldn't receive this resignation. They were trying to stop it. They were hoping that they would let Primate Wyszyński to continue in his office. Also, disintegration activities were underway. There were attempts to compromise and undermine his work as a primate, and also in the layman Catholics organizations such as Znak, Sign, or Bond, Więź. So there were attempts for the members of Pax Association also to negatively view Cardinal Wyszyński. So from 1961 onwards, the object case under the code name of Centrum Center was opened after creating the fourth department until the time he was dead. An operational case codename Prophet was opened, and this case collected all the possible information about the primate and his activities. He was constantly surveilled, observed 24/7, and it was very typical of the security services. His room was tapped, his phone was tapped. Opposite the place where he was living was also occupied by agents watching his every move. This was at the Miodowa Street, where 24/7 agents were looking at who was entering, who was leaving Primate's premises, his room, his apartment. And also there were attempts to characterize him, to create a kind of profile. And we can read, quote, "He is a great orator, great writer. He makes an impact on his surroundings because of his cordiality. He is empathetic towards others, strict towards himself. He works 14 hours a day, ascetic lifestyle, non-smoker, non-drinker. In the morning, in the evening, devotes a lot of time to prayer. He is extremely religious. People close to him think of him as a saint. He has no flaws, no addictions, and this is the reason why he is considered to be a future saint. The elderly congregation respect him, the young worship him. His fame is unsurpassed and envied. He's a man of extremely strong will." So following such bios, such descriptions of Cardinal Wyszyński that were created by the security forces, security services of the communist government, they were created, such descriptions, every 2 or 3 years. In the 70s, the security services of the communist government created a characteristic of Primate Wyszyński every year. Every year it was revised. Every year they were trying to give an update to his lifestyle. In the 60s, when the file codename Prophet came to be, there were attempts to look at what he had been doing during the Second World War. Also to look at what he did during the Second World War, because he was arrested by Gestapo in the Second World War. And the security services found Gestapo's translator in Zakopane. They got to him only so that they could get a glimpse of what was happening with Wyszyński at that time. There was a network of secret agents. When in 1953-56, Wyszyński was arrested, a dozen or so agents were observing his every move at that time. And all throughout his life, from 1949, he was followed and trailed, stalked by over 100 agents from various departments of the communist government. Various operational acts or files have information about him. Also, his relationship with the Catholic University of Lublin was looked into. There are materials showing his attitude to the so-called open Catholics. especially of the clubs of Catholic intelligentsia. So his persona was also a topic of various MA theses in the Security Services Higher School in Legionowo. And I'll read fragments of two MA theses. In 1975, Stanisław Lutyński wrote a paper called The Political Attitudes on the Example of Archdiocese of Gniezno, where multiple threads and points are devoted strictly to Primate Wyszyński. There's another MA paper written in 1984, MA thesis by Waldemar Chmielewski, entitled Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński Chosen Aspect of His Socio-Political Activities. So it just goes to show that also after his death, his activities were scrutinized. Looking at the materials collected by security services, stored now by the Institute of National Remembrance, we can see ample repository of his sermons, which were recorded, transcribed. Before the security services came up with the idea of recording the sermons, they sent stenographers who were transcribing in real time his sermons that were then closely observed and analyzed. And I agree with one of my colleagues that they were analyzing his speeches for political agenda. They were looking for anti-socialist political points, comments that they could use against him. And from that moment on, when they first started recording his sermons, all of his sermons from that moment are available to read in the documents. And on a final note, as part of activities against him, there was a specific unit that was tasked with taking pictures of Wyszyński only. The special albums of photographs of Wyszyński were created. So they were devoted to particular years of activities of Wyszyński, the most fruitful years. So they resembled family albums. The security services collected pictures of Wyszyński, put them in an album and captioned them. And looking at the materials of security services, on multiple occasions they used the assistance of priests who were agents, who helped them analyze those materials theologically. And as part of these activities, the security services were working together with the religious department, and the cooperation was so fruitful from the perspective of the communist government that, as we know, a lot of the priesthood or religious department of the communist government were former priests. So the security services were in the know. They were in the loop. They knew what he was doing. So the question is, did Primate Wyszyński know what was happening? We know that he knew exactly what was happening. We know he was warning other priests against agents, and he knew that in his close circle of acquaintances there were actually agents observing him. We know that Henryk Goździewicz, his secretary, was an agent, reporting on him to the communist government. He once went with Primate Wyszyński to Rome, and a lot of officials in Vatican knew that Goździewicz was a secret agent, and they were, accusing Primate Wyszyński, asking him, why didn't you pull him away? And he said that it's better to keep your enemies closer than moving him away and then having a different agent come to his place, somebody who couldn't be as trusted, who wasn't as well known. So Primate, asked about this, often said that you needed to be pure, with a pure heart. You were not supposed to give reasons for the security services to compromise you, to jeopardize you. And in the reports and the bios of Wyszyński, the security service emphasized Wyszyński's purity in activities and his actions, and the fact that he was trying to be above the political issues, and he was thinking of himself as a pure person, and he treated security services as flock that got lost and needed to be shown the way. Thank you.
Dziękujemy za wszystkie.
Thank you for all the presentations that we had in this session. They were all talking about the functioning of church in this communist reality at different levels. We have about half an hour for the question time. First, the question to the president of the Institute of National Remembrance. We were talking about the sources. Are there actually any areas of new sources? And the second question, did Cardinal Wyszyński, Cardinal Wojtyła, were they aware that they were actually surrounded in each episode of their life? Were they somehow constrained by that? Were they threatened somehow by it? What was they feeling? As we have heard in all those four talks, after 1945, all the clergy were invigilated because the Catholic Church was one of the basic threats for the communist regimes, because the church accumulated not only the faithful, but also people looking for freedom for the enslaved nation. Of course, John Paul II, but also Stefan Wyszyński, were aware that they were surveilled, that they were invigilated, but the purity of the intention and the ministry for the church meant that 3 decades of the activity of Cardinal Wyszyński made it possible that it was impossible for the security services to find something that could compromise the church. I have followed the documents on the potential charges, on potential charges of pedophilia, but it's a historical question. But can we ask ourselves, is it possible that for the 3 decades or 4 decades that they have been surveyed by the security services, and that there is no such a situation that security services make really serious accusations against them? So this is, for instance, the situation from the last year. It shows that this operative play or game played by the journalists aimed at destroying the authority of John Paul II shows clearly that it's just impossible to achieve. In the operative game, the journalists try to be more communist than the actual communist regime. The response of John Paul II to the real cases and threats of abuse that have been uncovered over the years, and this is actually something statistically natural, we could say, we have seen that the reactions of John Paul II were very dynamic. So the repression apparatus leveled at Stefan Wyszyński, but also John Paul II, was of course not entirely successful in their attempts. But we could also see it on the example of the priest Blasik. This points to the fact that this shows actually the sainthood. Our specialists looked very carefully into those documents. But concerning the second question, there are about 93 kilometers of documents, of facts, in the Institute of National Remembrance. So the acts at our institute, if we put one file next to the other, we could actually reach almost Garwolin. I really encourage the historians to take the opportunity and look into those files, because actually not everything has been explored. As Professor Skibiński said, the acts do not really contain the whole truth, but it doesn't also mean that they have no value. The historian should be able to compare the sources, should know how to verify the reliability of the documents. So what we can find in the Acts is partly the reality, partly it is mixed with journalistic action and propaganda. But we encourage everyone to actually explore and analyze the Acts. Last year, so what happened? What was happening last year? It turned out that the attacking journalists did not actually understand how the historical sources should be verified and approached. Just as you said, both journalists from last year attacks certainly had deficiencies in the use of sources. The documents that we can find at our institute should be approached in a proper way. So you can't search them as you usually approach the internet resources. And now a question to Father Dr. Dochnalik. What is interesting is the pastoral and theological perspective in the activity of John Paul II. It refers to not only the theological fidelity to the canon, if it comes to the pastoral care to the event, how did Karol Wojtyła react also in other cases? I think that historians could say a bit more about that, but since I'm a historian of canon law, I was interested in how the Pope applied the norms. So we can see there was a technical difficulty. We can see clearly that he cared for the communion of the church. He actually went beyond the standards of his times, but of course we can't compare it to today's standards. So when we compare the study by Mr. Litko, for instance, and the other author, it was not entirely justified what they said about his activity. I think that Karol Wojtyła was a pioneer in post Second Vatican Council. He was the pioneer in thinking that many mistakes were made by not understanding the law. Karol Wojtyła understood that the crime must be punished. What comes into his defense is what he did later on. He made key decisions. For instance, my colleague found in at the Institute of National Remembrance in Krakow a note how the activity should be conducted in the 1990s. So it said that the authority of Adam Sapieha should be attacked because it would undermine the authority of John Paul II. So this showed how this was approached by the security services. Now, if it comes to the phenomenon of the pilgrimages, it turned out that you said that the intention of the communist regime was to counteract the results of the pilgrimages. But in the 1980s, the expected results of the pilgrimages were changing. I think that every time, so after each pilgrimage, the authorities had to realize that they had to accept certain freedoms. So, for instance, the informational space in the 1970s was deprived of any participation of the faithful in the pilgrimage. There was no space for the bishops, but later on the authorities change the way they manipulated information. So, for instance, in the 1987, the authorities were just very defensive. They tried to somehow constrain those behaviors that were detrimental from their perspective. In 1979 and also in the during following pilgrimages, we could see what the communist Polish regime did, but also we could see how the entire Soviet bloc perceived the pilgrimages. While researching that time, I could see see that they were actually afraid of Pope, but they could not predict the number of people that could attend those pilgrimages. They were concerned with the social imagery that could be created through that. I cannot say why the Soviets in Moscow, in Berlin, in Prague were afraid of that, but in 1983 we could see that they tried to pressure Jaruzelski and his government that they do not accept do not accept Pope. But I actually coined the term that the presence of John Paul II on the Polish soil was a kind of threat for them, a kind of like exorcism. And of course, this is just a kind of metaphor because we can't find such a term in the sources. There was a strong aversion towards the very entry of Pope to the Soviet countries, especially Poland. For instance, you can't find such type of reaction in other countries, for instance, in the West. But talking about the results of the pilgrimages, when we compare the atmosphere of individual pilgrimages over the years, in the 70s and 80s, it shows the retreat of totalitarianism. But we could ask, this is retreat from what? From the pressure? We could actually see that in the early 80s, this regime can still pacify the society and the social movement, even brutally. But it turns out that this religious, spiritual element that historians very often forget in their analysis, this actually makes them retreat, despite their vast material resources. Because actually mobilizing people, millions of people, this is quite a great cost for the state, for the communist regime at the time of deep economical crisis. So I think both historians and theologians should explore this avenue, because we have no answer to it yet. We could try to find a way to describe this aspect. So it seems that they feared the phenomenon that could be greater than them, something that they could not dominate, overpower. And if it comes to the documents concerning the surveillance of John Paul II, are the attempts at generating the conflict between Cardinal Wyszyński and the society. Did security services invigilate Cardinal Wyszyński in such a way? Indeed, there were intentional attempts made at instigating a conflict between the primate and the rest of the church hierarchy. Because it seems so from the materials, we could the materials paint the primate as a kind of tyrant almost. But from other sources, we could see that he was actually open to the arguments. He was listening to other opinions. So, for instance, on the issue of the Marian cult, between the primate and the Archbishop Kominek, we see that he actually tasked the Archbishop with continuing the matter, and later on, the conception of Archbishop Kominek was implemented. Also, the nomination of Karol Wojtyła as the bishop and archbishop there were attempts made by the security services to introduce a conflict between Karol Wojtyła and Stefan Wyszyński. The problem was that Karol Wojtyła cooperated quite closely with the weekly Znak, and Stefan Wyszyński was conflicted with that environment. They undermined his authority. So the security services thought that it would be easy to introduce the conflict between the two, but it turned out that that his authority was really very strong, and Cardinal Wyszyński understood quite well the importance and the role of pastoral ministry in the contemporary world at that time. As we can read the reports from different meetings of the bishops, we could see that there were different opinions. They were not unanimous in their decisions, but the primate actually accepted those diverging opinions. And I think Professor Skibinski can shed more light on that. At one point, when Karol Wojtyła became cardinal, there was a division of tasks. Wojtyła was responsible for the cooperation of the Polish Church with abroad, whereas especially his cooperation with the Vatican, whereas the primate was responsible for the activity on the territory of Poland. But the security services wanted the society, the Polish society, to see the primate as a despot. And we can see it quite clearly even in today's publications. Right, it seems that we managed to be just on time. Thank you once again for all the talks and the discussion. Once again, thank you for the talks. I extend my gratitude to Ryszard Montusiewicz for moderating this debate. Of course, some questions are left open. For instance, the question how the forces that were fighting with the church were able to change the colors, so to say, but be still operational even today. Once again, thank you for that panel.
Drobne wspomnienia. Bardzo serdecznie dziękuję Państwu.